Have you ever wondered why the person you loved stopped looking at you the way they once did? You didn't click on this by accident. Something inside you shifted the moment you read that question. Maybe it brought back a memory. Maybe it touched that quiet weight you've been carrying for weeks, months, or even years. A weight that never truly goes away. No matter how busy you stay, no matter how often you tell yourself you've moved on, deep down you know you haven't. You did everything you believed love required. You were always there when she needed you. You replied before she even finished texting. You gave up time with friends, paused your own goals, sacrificed your energy, and slowly put yourself second. Yet somewhere along the way, something changed. Something you couldn't explain. Most people never talk about this. Instead, they tell you that you'll eventually meet someone else, as if that answers the real question. But the real question isn't whether you'll find someone new. The real question is why. Why did giving more seem to make you matter less? Why did trying harder create more distance? Why did the man who appeared to make less effort end up where you hoped to be? Here's the uncomfortable truth. She didn't walk away because you treated her badly. In many cases, she walked away because, without realizing it, you stopped being yourself. Little by little, you won the version of yourself you believed she wanted. And the moment you lost your own identity, you also lost the qualities that made you naturally attractive. This isn't about kindness being a weakness. Kindness is valuable. The problem begins when kindness turns into self-neglect. When your own identity fades, your confidence fades with it. I know this is difficult to hear. Part of you probably wants to reject it. That's completely understandable. No one enjoys hearing that part of the problem may have started within themselves. But if you're still listening, then perhaps a part of you already recognizes this truth. Over the next few minutes, we're going to explore this honestly. No shortcuts, no clever tricks, and no empty promises. This isn't about memorizing lines or following a formula. It's about understanding how attraction works beneath the surface and why it's often very different from what we've been taught. We'll uncover the hidden principles behind connection, the ones rarely explained by family, school, or movies. More importantly, we'll look at the one change that can reshape your relationships, not by changing who you pretend to be, but by helping you become firmly grounded in who you really are. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear may change the way you see yourself. Researchers once observed couples dealing with emotional challenges. One group reflected on moments when they constantly gave in to their partner's wishes while ignoring their own. Another group remembered times when they respectfully stood by their own values, even when it created a little disagreement. The findings surprised many people. Partners of those who consistently sacrificed themselves reported lower relationship satisfaction over time. Instead of creating greater closeness, endless self-sacrifice slowly reduced appreciation, weakened attraction, and in many cases, quietly diminished respect. So why does giving more sometimes produce less? The answer lies in the way our minds naturally evaluate value. Human beings are wired to appreciate things that feel meaningful, uncommon, and earned. When something is always available without limits, the brain gradually begins to treat it as ordinary, not because it lacks quality, but because it no longer feels valuable. The opposite is also true. Things that require effort, patience, and genuine investment often feel more meaningful. This isn't simply an opinion. It's connected to how motivation and reward systems operate in the brain. That same principle quietly influences relationships. When you become the person who's always available, never disagrees, and constantly reshapes your life around someone else, you're unintentionally sending a message. The message isn't, "I'm dependable." The message becomes, "Nothing in my life matters more than you." While that may sound romantic on the surface, it often creates an unhealthy imbalance. Psychologists describe a similar effect through what is sometimes called accessibility bias. The more effortlessly something is available, the easier it becomes for people to take its presence for granted. Again, this isn't because its quality has changed, but because its perceived value has shifted. Think about someone you've probably met, the person who wasn't constantly checking their phone, who had meaningful goals, hobbies, and a fulfilling life, often attracted attention naturally. Not because they were better than everyone else, but because they communicated something powerful without saying a word. I have a life that matters, and I'm inviting you to share it, not replacing it. That difference changes everything, because true attraction isn't only about appearance or charm, it's about identity. It's about who you are when nobody is watching. So let me ask you something. When was the last time you did something simply because it made you feel alive? Not because someone else approved, not because it benefited a relationship, not because it earned attention, just because it reflected who you truly are. If that question takes time to answer, it may reveal something important. Psychology describes a pattern called relational fusion. It happens when someone slowly begins defining their entire identity through the relationship they're in. Their hobbies revolve around their partner. Their schedule revolves around their partner. Their choices revolve around their partner. Eventually, they stop asking, "What do I want?" Instead, they ask, "What will she think?" Little by little, their identity fades. When the relationship struggles or ends, they don't only lose another person, they lose themselves. That empty feeling afterward often comes not only from heartbreak, but from forgetting who they were before the relationship began. The unsettling part is that this transformation rarely feels unhealthy while it's happening. It feels like devotion. It feels like commitment. It even feels like love. Only later do many people realize how much of themselves quietly disappeared, not because anyone demanded it, but because they believed that's what love required. There's an important difference between sharing your life with someone and losing yourself inside theirs. Healthy love comes from two complete individuals choosing to walk together. Unhealthy dependence happens when someone hopes another person will complete what they believe is missing within themselves. People may not always explain this difference, but they often sense it. They feel the difference between someone who freely chooses to love and someone who's quietly afraid of being left behind. At this point, you might be thinking that this all sounds easier in theory than in real life. And you're right about one thing. When you genuinely care about someone, it's natural for them to become an important part of your world. What isn't inevitable is allowing that feeling to replace your entire identity. That happens through a series of small choices that often go unnoticed. You slowly stop investing in your own goals. Your interests become less important. Your routines begin revolving around another person's schedule. Before long, your happiness depends almost entirely on how the relationship is going. Beneath this pattern is something many people never recognize. Fear. Not fear of love itself, but fear of not being enough. The fear that if you stop proving your value every day, the other person will lose interest. The fear that if you say no, set limits, or prioritize yourself once in a while, they'll leave. Ironically, this fear often creates the very outcome it's trying to avoid. Psychologist John Bowlby spent decades studying how human attachment develops from childhood. His research showed that the emotional patterns we learn early in life often continue into our adult relationships. When someone grows up receiving inconsistent affection, sometimes feeling emotionally secure, and other times feeling uncertain, they may develop what's known as anxious attachment. People with this pattern become extremely sensitive to changes in relationships. A delayed reply feels significant. A different tone of voice feels alarming. A little distance feels like the beginning of abandonment. To reduce that anxiety, they often try to give even more. They become more available, more accommodating, more willing to sacrifice themselves. They believe that if they love harder, they'll finally feel secure. Unfortunately, the opposite often happens. Constant reassurance slowly turns into emotional dependence. The relationship becomes centered around fear rather than genuine connection. As anxiety grows, one person reaches closer, while the other naturally begins asking for more space. That additional space creates even more anxiety, leading to even stronger efforts to hold on. Without realizing it, both people become trapped in a cycle that leaves them emotionally exhausted. Recognizing this pattern takes courage. It requires looking honestly at yourself instead of only focusing on what someone else did. But awareness is always the first step toward change. Without it, the same story simply repeats itself with different people. Many people search for shortcuts. They study clever messages. They memorize conversation techniques. They try acting distant because someone online told them it creates attraction. But none of those strategies solve the real issue. If your actions are still driven by fear, insecurity eventually reveals itself. People may not always identify the reason, but they often sense the difference. Real confidence isn't created by pretending. It's built by understanding yourself. It's knowing your strengths without believing you're perfect. It's accepting your flaws without believing you're unworthy. That kind of confidence doesn't need constant approval. It remains steady even when life becomes uncertain. You can often recognize it immediately. It appears in the way someone speaks, the way they make decisions, the way they handle disappointment, the way they remain calm under pressure. A person with genuine self-respect doesn't rely on someone else's attention to feel valuable. They appreciate love. They enjoy companionship. They feel sadness when relationships end, but they don't lose their identity because of it. Their purpose continues. Their direction remains. Their life still has meaning. Ironically, this quiet stability often becomes naturally attractive, not because it's a strategy, but because it reflects emotional balance. It communicates something powerful. I enjoy being with you, but I also enjoy being myself. That's a very different message from, I need you in order to feel complete. Many people misunderstand emotional independence. They assume it means acting distant or pretending not to care. It doesn't. Healthy independence isn't emotional coldness. It isn't building walls. It isn't ignoring your feelings. It's having a stable foundation within yourself. It's knowing that your emotional well-being isn't entirely controlled by someone else's choices. From that place, vulnerability actually becomes easier. You can express your feelings honestly without turning them into emotional pressure. Think about these two statements. I'm excited to spend more time with you. And, I need you to stay because I don't know who I am without you. The words may sound similar on the surface, but emotionally, they're completely different. One comes from confidence. The other comes from fear. People naturally respond differently to each. Now let's talk about boundaries. Not as a way to control people, not as a technique to appear mysterious, but as an honest reflection of self-respect. Healthy boundaries simply define where your responsibilities end and another person's begin. They communicate your values, your priorities, your limits, without anger, without punishment, without manipulation. People who never establish boundaries often believe they're being loving. In reality, they're usually creating confusion. Relationships need honesty. They need mutual respect. They need two people who can express themselves openly. Many people avoid speaking up because they fear conflict, so they remain silent. They smile when something genuinely hurts them. They agree when they actually disagree. They accept situations that quietly damage their peace. At first, this seems like kindness. Over time, it becomes silent resentment. That resentment slowly affects every interaction. The relationship may continue on the surface, but underneath, it becomes increasingly fragile. There's another important truth. People often learn how to treat us by observing what we consistently accept. If you continually ignore your own needs, others may begin overlooking them too. Not necessarily because they're unkind, but because no clear expectations were ever established. Patterns naturally develop over time. That's why healthy boundaries protect both people. They create clarity, they encourage honesty, and they allow each person to know who the other truly is. Only then can love be directed toward the real person, rather than a version carefully shaped to meet someone else's expectations. There's another belief that quietly influences many relationships. The belief that love works like a transaction. If I give enough, I'll receive enough. If I sacrifice enough, I'll be appreciated. If I always do the right thing, everything will work out. This mindset feels logical because it matches many other parts of life. Study consistently, improve your skills, work hard, earn better results. Those principles often work in education, careers, and personal growth. Relationships, however, don't always follow that formula. Connection isn't earned through endless sacrifice. Attraction isn't a reward handed out for perfect behavior. It's influenced by personality, emotional health, timing, compatibility, shared values, and many other factors beyond anyone's complete control. Understanding this doesn't mean giving up on love. It means letting go of the exhausting belief that perfection guarantees a perfect relationship. Instead, focus your energy where it truly belongs. Build meaningful goals. Develop real friendships. Take care of your physical and mental health. Learn new skills. Spend time understanding yourself. Create a life that feels meaningful, even when you're alone. Because when your life already feels complete, relationships become something you choose to enrich it, not something you depend on to define it. From a psychological perspective, attraction is closely connected to curiosity and discovery. People naturally become interested in those who have a meaningful life of their own. Goals, passions, friendships, and a clear sense of purpose. When someone is completely predictable and always available, the excitement of discovery gradually fades. But when a person continues growing, learning, and living a fulfilling life, they naturally become more engaging. This doesn't mean playing games or pretending to be unavailable. It means genuinely building a life that doesn't depend entirely on someone else's attention. Healthy relationships are built between two complete individuals, not between two people expecting the other to fill every emotional gap. When you focus on becoming stronger mentally, emotionally, and physically, your confidence becomes natural instead of forced. You stop seeking constant approval because your self-worth comes from within. The most attractive quality isn't perfection, it's authenticity. It's knowing who you are, standing by your values, and continuing to grow regardless of who comes or goes in your life. People are naturally drawn to those who have direction, purpose, and emotional stability, not because they're trying to impress others, but because they're genuinely living a meaningful life. So instead of asking, "How do I make someone choose me?" start asking, "How do I become the best version of myself?" That single question changes everything. When your life is built on purpose instead of fear, your relationships become healthier, your decisions become clearer, and your happiness no longer depends on someone else's approval. Real confidence doesn't chase. It attracts through authenticity, self-respect, and emotional balance. The biggest lesson is simple. Never lose yourself while trying to keep someone else. Build a life you're proud of. Chase meaningful goals. Protect your peace. Stay true to your values. Love should add to your life, not replace your identity. When you become emotionally strong, confident, and authentic, you naturally create healthier relationships. People are drawn to those who respect themselves and live with purpose. So don't focus on chasing approval. Focus on becoming